Most fantasy stories are about defeating evil, but How to Train Your Dragon is different. Its greatest conflicts are never solved through strength alone. They're solved through understanding. Between Vikings and dragons, between fathers and sons, between people who spend years looking at each other without ever truly seeing each other clearly. And once you notice that, you start to realize almost every major relationship in the film is built around the exact same idea. Berk is a world defined by misunderstanding. The Vikings misunderstand the dragon. Stoick misunderstands Hiccup. Astrid misunderstands Hiccup. Snotlout hides who he really is behind arrogance and performance. Even Hiccup himself doesn't fully understand who he is at the beginning of the film. And somehow, in less than 2 hours, this movie manages to transform every one of those relationships into something deeper, warmer, and profoundly human. That's why the story hits so hard emotionally. Not because dragons are cool, although they are, but because every major arc in the film is about finally learning to see someone clearly. And that idea is already present in the very first minutes of the film, because the brilliance of the opening isn't just that it explains the world efficiently, it's that every piece of the world is built around misunderstanding.
One of the hardest things fantasy adaptations have to pull off isn't the action or even the characters, it's the world. Because in a book, you can spend chapters slowly teaching the reader how everything works, but on screen, you've got minutes before people decide if they're in or out, even more so on streaming. And most movies solve that problem the lazy way. Someone starts talking, a lot, about everything. The problem is, exposition like that doesn't feel like a world being discovered. It feels like homework. And that's why the opening of How to Train Your Dragon is so interesting, because it does the exact opposite of what safe fantasy storytelling usually does. In under 8 minutes, it builds an entire living world, introduces the main characters, establishes the central conflict, and quietly plants the emotional core of the story without ever stopping to explain itself. And what's even more surprising is how simple it is when you break it down, because this opening isn't impressive because it's complicated. It's impressive because it shouldn't work this well, and yet it does. The opening to this movie does 3 things really well: world building, character introductions, and foreshadowing. Shockingly, it manages to show most of this rather than tell it. Yes, the movie does begin with a voiceover. This is a dangerous tool to use because it can quickly become exposition dumping, but I think this movie manages to avoid that. I think it uses the tool successfully. One reason is that instead of a generic epic voice giving us the entire history of the world all at once for context, How to Train Your Dragon instead uses its main character. And he doesn't sound like he's reading from a history textbook either. This intro is full of wit and whimsy. It has voice. So while it is technically telling us a lot of what we need to know, it does so in a way that is unique and, frankly, iconic. The intro sets up the world the characters live in through setup and payoff. Hiccup says this instantly creates intrigue and interest because it doesn't make sense, at least until we see the dragons. Hiccup also says they have a pest problem, which is a humorous way to put what the audience probably guesses to be those dragons. The live-action movie takes this a step further and mentions that the Vikings of Berk have decided to take the fight to the dragons, which sets up one of the changes made for that movie from the animated one. But not only does it build the world that the story takes place in, it also fills in that world by introducing both the main and side characters and the villains, if you want to call them that. First, of course, we meet Hiccup. He doesn't tell us much about himself at first, but we are shown a lot more about him. Again, great writing. All the other Vikings ask him why he's out. Shouldn't he be inside? We obviously don't know why that's the case, but we figure it out pretty soon when Gobber is introduced, as he lays it out clearly. Hiccup is a disappointment. We get, of course, the legendary line, "You just gestured to all of me," and this is just one of the brilliant writing tricks that this movie uses that are set up in the opening of the movie. I call it top and tail writing, or bookends. This line is used again, but has an entirely different meaning by the end of the movie, showing exactly how dialogue should be used in storytelling. It shows not just Hiccup's growth, but also Stoick's growth. Stoick is, of course, another character who's introduced at the beginning. Hiccup says that he is the best dragon fighter of all time, telling that lovely story about Stoick popping a dragon's head off its shoulders when he was a child, but these are not just words for very long. We see Stoick literally strangle a natter, and then, of course, punch a monstrous nightmare in the face. Stoick's introduction can't be understood as good as it is without also thinking about Hiccup's introduction for the dragons. He goes through each of them, saying how much fame and renown he would get from killing them, Right when he mentions that only the bravest Vikings take on a monstrous nightmare, we see Stoick go face to face with one. Again, this opening uses both showing and telling masterfully. They work in tandem rather than one replacing the other. This dragon setup also gives us the stakes of the story. Burke is in a battle, a constant battle for their very survival. This is no small stakes adventure, it is a fight for their actual lives, and we see how seriously the characters take it. We meet a few more characters I haven't mentioned yet following this. Of course, the introduction that gets the most time and has the most importance is Astrid's. She is obviously the most important to the plot, and thus the script focuses on her a little longer. She is given the classic love interest introduction, complete with massive explosions behind her. We also meet the twins, Fishlegs, and Snotlout. Now, Snotlout is actually given a little more time in the remake because he is given his own mini-arc in that movie, which I absolutely love. In the original, he, along with the twins and Fishlegs, is pretty much just comic relief and that's it. But the remake does give him a little story with his father that mirrors Hiccup's in a beautiful way. Subscribe to watch my future video on that because that will be coming out. Because of this, we get to see that story set up when Snotlout's dad acts embarrassed about him. This is, of course, immediately following the scene where Stoick is embarrassed by Hiccup. So let's get into how those two are set up, because while the dragons provide the physical conflict in this movie, the emotional conflict revolves entirely around fathers and sons, specifically Stoick and Hiccup. Hiccup is not like his father. Like I said, he's a disappointment. And the first 7 minutes of the movie tell us this. It's not until the end of the opening that we actually get to see it. After Hiccup finally takes down a dragon, he is chased by the only one that saw it, another dragon. His father has to come rescue him, but not before the dragon causes a ton of damage to Burke, and in the live action, causes a natter to escape with the sheep. All of this just goes to prove that Hiccup is what his father says he is, a disappointment, that he needs to change, quote, all of this. But this intro scene doesn't just show Hiccup's character flaws, it also gives us Stoick's. Throughout the whole scene, he refuses to listen to Hiccup. At least 3 times in these 8 minutes, Hiccup tries to tell his dad something, but he just won't listen. So we see both Hiccup and Stoick's character flaws, but we're also given their positive attributes. Stoick cares deeply for his son and his village as the chieftain, and of course, there's the obvious positive about him being a great dragon fighter. As for Hiccup, we see his ingenuity. We see his desire to make his father proud. In every aspect, this opening is perfect for those characters.
And that misunderstanding doesn't just define Burke's war with dragons. It defines Hiccup's entire relationship with his father.
A father who believes he knows what his son needs, and a son who is desperate to prove he's more than what his father sees. And the strange part is, depending on who you're watching, they're both right. Stoick isn't blind. He's not cruel. He's protecting a world that's constantly under attack. Hiccup, he's not naive. He isn't just different. He's trying to survive in a world that doesn't have space for him. And somewhere in between those two perspectives, the entire movie starts to take shape. Because the real question this story keeps asking isn't, can Vikings and dragons coexist? It's something much smaller and much more personal. Can a father and son actually understand each other before it's too late? And once you see that, you start to realize every major moment in this film hits different. So let's break down how How to Train Your Dragon quietly turns a fantasy war story into one of the most honest father-son narratives in modern animation. Father and son is one of the most important relationships in existence. I think I could argue that in my belief system of Christianity, it is the most important one. This movie examines that relationship in such a tangible and human way. Despite the dragons flying everywhere, this is one of the most real explorations of the relationship between a father and a son in modern fiction. Neither Hiccup nor Stoick is perfect. They both have flaws that we will get into in this video, and if you look at it from their points of view, they're both right. It is simply a matter of if they can work it out between them. Can they understand each other? And that's where the crux of the story lies. Because if you think about it, the ending this movie goes with is not the only possibility. Hiccup could have simply killed the monstrous nightmare, earned his father's respect, and then we would have had an entirely different third act that would be just as interesting as the one we got. Stoick could have just simply listened to Hiccup at any point during the story, and then both latter acts of the movie would have turned out quite differently. But that leads me into the characters themselves rather than the plot. Although distinguishing one from the other is a little misguided, I think that characters make plot. Let's start with Stoick. Upon Stoick's introduction, we immediately know what kind of person he is. And not just because Hiccup tells us in voiceover. Instead, we actually see it. We see Stoick punch a dragon in the face and it run away whimpering. We see Stoick's desire to protect his village as the chief. In fact, this virtue, this protectiveness, is not flawless for Stoick. Some of the most interesting flaws for characters can be those that are simply something good taken too far. And that's exactly what we see with Stoick here. He's an incredible leader. We see him inspire his people multiple times throughout the story, and it's because he understands them. He really knows them. But he doesn't know Hiccup. This is the flaw I was talking about before. Stoick just does not listen. He is so preoccupied with running the village, fighting the dragons, and finding their nest that he never sits down and listens to Hiccup. We know he's not a closed-minded person because we see him listen to Gobber at various points, but for some reason when it comes to Hiccup, his eyes and ears are closed. I think that the loyalty Stoick feels has something to do with it. He is unshakably loyal to his people and to his purpose. He says as much in the scene where he fires up the Vikings to go search for the dragon's nest. But this loyalty is the very thing that keeps him from understanding his son. Hiccup isn't like his dad. He's scrawny, confused, and most definitely not a leader, at least at the beginning of the story. He can't fight dragons and literally is just supposed to stay inside during dragon attacks. Much has been written on Hiccup's arc, and I shall add to that pile. Hiccup begins the story trying to be something he's not. He straight up says, I just want to be one of you guys. Gobber tells him that he needs to change literally everything about himself, and he almost succeeds. I think that if Hiccup could have brought himself to kill Toothless after taking him down, his whole emotional arc would be different. I do think that if Hiccup could have done that, he would have become a great dragon fighter. Look, he may not be athletic or a powerful warrior now, but we see in future installments that he does become a great warrior. However, the story this movie is telling is not about Hiccup learning how to kill. Instead, it's about Hiccup teaching the rest of his village that killing isn't the only way. And how does Hiccup learn that? Through connection. He manages to build a connection with Toothless, a bond so strong that Toothless pretty much sacrifices himself for Hiccup at the end of the second act. Really, Toothless is the catalyst for Hiccup to change, and Hiccup is the catalyst for Stoick and the rest of the village to change. Hiccup learns through Toothless that the dragons aren't just monsters. Rather, they're creatures who are every bit as alive, caring, and sensitive as the Vikings of Berk. I don't know if that says more about the dragons or the Vikings, but I think there's something interesting in this. Both the Vikings and the dragons are ruled by fear. The Vikings are afraid of the dragons, and the dragons are afraid of a bigger dragon. But when Hiccup conquers that fear by understanding Toothless, it breaks that cycle of violence. It frees everyone involved and allows them to see new opportunities. When Hiccup understands Toothless, he doesn't just understand dragons. He also finally understands himself. This knowledge of who he is, his strengths, and what he really wants is what allows Hiccup to actually succeed. He wasn't bad at everything before Toothless because he didn't have the skill. No, he didn't have the purpose, the reason, or the support. Hiccup's creations worked, but nobody cared. If you think about it, Hiccup's canon would have revolutionized the Vikings' fight against the dragons, but they just weren't willing to listen to him. So this brings us to the finale, the third act, the climax of the movie. Stoick has found out about Toothless and yet again not listened to Hiccup. He is so furious at Hiccup for endangering all the people at the Trial of Flame, and so excited by the possibility that they could finally end the reign of the dragons that he doesn't heed any of Hiccup's warnings. However, because of this, he is forced to listen to Hiccup. The Alpha Dragon is so much more powerful than anything the Vikings have ever faced that Stoick literally can't do anything to fight it. He is finally forced to listen to his son and to see him for who he truly is. Not a failed version of Stoick, not a disappointment, his own person, with skills and abilities different from Stoick. This is the beauty of the relationship between a father and a son. When Stoick realizes that it doesn't really matter if Hiccup is like him or not, he realizes what he knew all along. He loves Hiccup anyway. This is why my favorite scene in this movie is not the romantic flight with Astrid. It's not when Hiccup is becoming friends with Toothless. It's not even the test flight. It's when Stoick realizes that Toothless has saved Hiccup and he cries out with joy, "He's alive, my son is alive." Because in the end, these characters are not that different from each other. Both care deeply for their village, for the people around them, and for each other. Both only want what is best for all of those people. And when they realize this, it's one of the most meaningful moments of any movie I've ever seen.
And once you realize the story is really about people failing to understand each other, you start noticing that pattern everywhere, and not just with Hiccup and Stoick. That's what makes Snotlout so interesting in the remake. For the first time, the movie reveals that his arrogance isn't confidence at all. It's insecurity.
He's the comic relief, the loud, arrogant Viking who exists mostly to get laughed at and knocked down a peg. So when the live-action movie came out, nobody expected him to change. If anything, he seemed like the least important character to change. But then something surprising happened. Snotlout didn't just get more screen time, he got a real arc, one that turns his arrogance into something a lot more uncomfortable, insecurity. And the more you watch it unfold, the more you realize this isn't just funny jerk becomes slightly nicer. It's a mirror of the main story of the film. Fathers, sons, and the desperate need to be seen as enough. So the question isn't just what changed about Snotlout, it's why this version of the story needed him to change at all. Welcome to the longest freaking Snotlout essay ever written. Snotlout is interesting to me because multiple things work together to make him who he is. The first, he's short. Now look, to many people this may not seem like much, but as a person a little on the shorter side myself, I will admit that sometimes it makes you feel lesser. I don't want to say inferior because that isn't the right word. I think a good way of putting it is that you sometimes still feel like you're a child. Like you don't deserve to be in certain places because you're too small, you're too young. I think that this influences Snotlout even if he doesn't show it or outright say it, because his height is really only an extenuation of the main thing I want to talk about today. Snotlout's relationship with his dad. If I was going to boil Snotlout's arc down to one word, it would be insecure. Or insecurity. Let me explain why. When we are introduced to Snotlout in the live-action movie, he's making fun of Hiccup. He's taunting, "Shouldn't you be in bed?" he says. Now, this line does a lot for the audience in explaining who Hiccup is, but I think it is also the first thing to explain who Snotlout is. The second thing that does this comes a few moments after Stoick is finished lecturing Hiccup and being embarrassed by him. We hear Snotlout say, "My dad's super proud of me," and then when he sees his dad, "Hey dad, I was just talking about you." But his dad interrupts him, telling him, "Don't talk to me in public." This is the main story of Snotlout's arc, his relationship with his father. And if you've watched any video breaking down the story of How to Train Your Dragon, you know that it revolves around fathers and sons. The main story is about Stoick and Hiccup, and I have a video discussing that, so I won't get into it too much here. You can click to go watch that. But this is what makes Snotlout's story so beautiful. He's a mirror of Hiccup, where Hiccup's insecurity displays itself as a lack of confidence and as embarrassment, Snotlout responds in the complete opposite direction. He puts on a front of confidence, even arrogance, to hide how insecure he really is. I mean, think about it. His dad, whom he obviously respects and desperately wants to impress, won't even talk to him in public. If your dad doesn't believe in you and you live on an island where there are almost no people who are tender or caring, who is going to encourage you when you get down? Nobody. Even his name is silly as much as he tries to deny it. It's in fact the one thing that Hiccup chooses to make fun of in the entire movie. It's a lot easier to put others down to feel good about yourself than it is to legitimately work on yourself. And this first thing is what Snotlout does. We see it almost every time he's on screen. Almost every line he has is either building himself up or putting Hiccup down. The insecurity his father cultivated in him by virtue of his embarrassment displays itself in ugly ways. But we see that Snotlout doesn't blame his father for anything. He still respects and cares about him, even when it's very hard to tell if his father feels the same. We can easily see that Snotlout's father does not respect him, despite how hard Snotlout works for him. In the scene where the Vikings are returning from their failed expedition to find the dragon's nest, Snotlout is pretty much the first person waiting on the dock. He immediately takes his father's bags and tries to talk to him about what's going on in his life. He specifically says that he has so much to tell him about dragon training and the Trial of Flame, and you would think that those are the exact kind of things a Viking dad would want to hear about, but no, not Snotlout's dad. He disappears on Snotlout, leaving him to tell empty air that he would see him back at the house. But still, Snotlout isn't mad. He simply carries the bag back to the house alone. However, this story doesn't end here. Snotlout earns his dad's respect, and it's not easy. It takes an incredible amount of bravery from Snotlout. Honestly, Snotlout has to have the most bravery of any of the crew when it comes to riding his dragon. For some reason, Hiccup decides that Snotlout will ride the dragon that, quote, according to Hiccup, has a nasty tendency to set itself on fire. Way to get back at your boy, Hiccup. And you do gotta feel a little bad for Snotlout. And fight he does. Snotlout literally lands on the alpha dragon's head and pounds its eye. We're back to talking about his father now, because we see him do a double take when he sees Snotlout on the dragon. And just like Stoick next to him, you can literally see his eyes open to who his son really is. Snotlout has his flaws, everyone does, and Snotlouts are loud and obnoxious. But in this story, he is still an example of bravery and loyalty, and his dad finally sees that by the end. The resolution of Snotlout's arc comes at the end of this battle, after Hiccup takes down the dragon, but before they realize he's alive. Snotlout stands next to his dragon, and we get the first sign of any kind that his dad cares for him. There's no words, no "I'm proud of you, son." Simply a hand on the shoulder. A silent touch, but in public, in front of everyone. To me, this moment means just as much as when Stoick says to Hiccup, "I'm proud to call you my son." Snotlout and his dad have a beautiful arc that mirrors Stoick and Hiccup's. It's brilliant writing, and the fact that they added it in the live-action remake just proves to me again why that movie should exist. Snotlout is no simple side character. He is a complex person with hopes, desires, motivations, and flaws. He wants to impress his dad, he wants to earn Astrid's love, and he wants to be a man. He struggles with feelings of insecurity. He puts on a facade of what he believes is confidence, but what comes across as arrogance. He may not achieve everything he wanted, but he does grow along the way. He earns his dad's respect, and he makes him proud. Snotlout isn't just comedic relief, he's a person, just like everyone else on Berk. The story just gives him the time to shine. I want to get into Snotlout's other main motivation throughout the story, Astrid. If you look at it, Snotlout does almost everything right, or he at least tries the right things. He tries to be chivalrous during dragon training. He's actually part of the fire squad. From his perspective, he has done everything he should to earn Astrid's love. Hiccup, on the other hand, is totally useless. He's such a loser, but still she chooses him? Even at the climax of the story, at Snotlout's bravest moment, he really only goes because of Astrid. When you think about the movie from Snotlout's perspective, you start to feel a little bad for him in this respect. There's really only one girl that anyone wants, and before this movie, Snotlout is literally the best option. Then Hiccup goes and cheats, using his dragon to woo Astrid. It's a wonder Snotlout doesn't get mad at Hiccup for stealing his girl. There is the possibility that he doesn't realize it actually happened until after the final battle, but I would rather assume that Snotlout just takes it on the chin and realizes he can still fight for her anyways.
But Astrid's role in the story goes beyond romance. She becomes the first person in Berk willing to trust Hiccup before the rest of the world changes around him.
Hiccup and Astrid stand out as one of the most compelling couples in fantasy, but it's not for the reasons you might expect. It's not because their relationship is full of drama, or because every moment between them is perfectly written. It's because they really shouldn't work at all, and somehow they do. So the real question isn't whether they're compatible, it's how Astrid, the strongest fighter in her class, ends up seeing something in Hiccup that no one else does. And to answer that, we need to look at Astrid's arc in the first movie. Astrid and Hiccup are complete opposites. Astrid is powerful. She literally wields a double-edged war axe, one of the heaviest weapons you can. Hiccup can't even wield a sword. I mean, look at his chosen weapon. It's a knife. Astrid is athletic. Look at her flipping around the arena while Hiccup can barely walk. But those are all physical traits. I'm more interested in the personality traits. Because if we look at it, Astrid is the perfect Viking. So we need to understand who she is to understand why Hiccup is able to change her mind so easily. Astrid is passionate. We see that multiple times throughout the story. She cares deeply about things. She is a deeper character on an emotional level than Snotlout, Rough Nut, Tough Nut, or even Gobber. In fact, it's probably not a hot take to say that she is the third most important character in the movie behind Hiccup and Stoick. But Astrid's passion is not without direction. She knows what they are here to do, and she takes it seriously. Unlike the rest of her peers, Astrid actually understands the stakes of the war between Berk and the dragon. It's a fight for their very survival, and this is where her passion is truly showcased. She literally yells at the rest of the kids, "Are any of you taking this seriously? Our parents' war is about to become ours." then to Hiccup, figure out which side you're on. Unlike Hiccup, she's had to work for everything she has. She literally points out to him that she's never had any handouts. She's earned her way into dragon training, unlike Hiccup. And you can tell that she has literally been training her whole life to fight dragons. She mentions that she's already read the entire book of dragons, and while she may not be spouting it off compulsively like fish legs, it's evident that she knows exactly what she's getting herself into with each dragon that she fights. Astrid is much more similar to Stoick than she is to Hiccup. Just like him, she is a very great dragon fighter, extremely loyal to her village, and a great leader. She is everything Stoick wishes Hiccup would be. And the live-action remake leans into this. Astrid says in that movie that she wants to be chief, and Hiccup literally agrees that she would be a great chiefess. Astrid has grown up fully committed to their war against the dragons. It has literally formed every aspect of her personality and her physical appearance. So why does she flip on a coin? It seems like a simple magical ride is all it takes to convince her. Well, let's take a look at what Astrid was really convinced of in that scene. The way I look at it, Astrid was not convinced that dragons are good, or even that they aren't her enemy, and she tells Hiccup so immediately after. She says that his newfound friendship, or whatever it is, does not erase everything that the dragons have done to them. Then, if we think about it a little bit more, we know that the Vikings traveled to Berk from all over the world specifically to try and find and destroy the home of the dragons. This implies that the dragons have not only been harming the Isle of Berk for a while, but that even the generations before have been harmed by these very dragons. Astrid is right to not be done fighting dragons. They have been terrorizing Berk for generations, and their whole purpose on Berk is to destroy those dragons. She's not going to change her mind after that one little flight on Toothless. However, she's not stupid. What this flight does do is change her mind about Hiccup. I don't think she really changes her mind at this point about Toothless. She just says that she's sorry to get him to stop spinning. But it allows her to see Hiccup in an entirely new light. Look, Hiccup and Astrid have known each other their whole lives. They have to have, since the island only has like 50 people on it and 6 of them are children. That doesn't seem like a very sustainable population if you ask me. So she has a perceived view of who Hiccup is. The same as everyone else, weak and useless. And when I say weak, I don't just mean physically, although that is true. She probably doesn't realize that Hiccup is smart, that he has his own skills. Again, just like Stoick. But what this flight does is show her who Hiccup really is. She sees that he has value and really probably sees him as his own person for the first time. The fact that he tamed a literal night fury that no one's ever seen before shows her that he has the ability to do everything a Viking should be able to do. She also gets to see his ingenuity as he rides the dragon. And of course, the romantic flight surely helps. So to me, Astrid's arc doesn't revolve around the dragons, it revolves around how she sees Hiccup. And interestingly, she also points out that Hiccup will still have to kill a dragon the next day. So obviously, she doesn't necessarily think that a dragon's life is worth defending yet. But she does show clear concern for Hiccup and how he's going to respond. This is reinforced at the Trial of Flame the next day. She tells Hiccup that she will stand by him come what may. Not Toothless, not the dragons, but Hiccup. And it's not just words either. She promises not to snitch on Toothless, and she doesn't. She says that she won't tell Stoick about the nest, even if she thinks it's her duty. She listens, unlike Stoick, to Hiccup's point about how his father would just lead the other Vikings into a slaughter. Then, of course, during the action scene, she saves Hiccup multiple times. She is still the better warrior and dragon fighter that Hiccup is, after all. On a side note, I really don't understand why the Elder gave Hiccup Top Slayer. From her perspective, he literally just talked the dragons into going back into their cages every time. Astrid actually fought the dragons and beat them in combat. So there's my take. Astrid was snubbed. Don't snub that subscribe button or the like button if you've enjoyed the video so far. But Astrid again backs up her words with actions. I think it's important to remember that Astrid still doesn't like dragons after the Trial of Flame, but she trusts Hiccup now. She believes in him, and that matters more to her than her prior beliefs about the dragons. In my opinion, trust is the most important thing to have in any relationship, especially one that is tested through so much physical conflict. I made a whole nother video about trust between Percy and Annabeth, and if you want to check that out, it dives into the idea a whole lot more. Astrid trusts Hiccup completely now. This is vital to realize as we move forward in the timeline. Astrid understands who Hiccup is, even if Hiccup doesn't yet. And that is what leads to the scene where she tells him to do something about it. For Astrid, action has always solved her problems. That is what she's used to. Hiccup's actions have always led to disaster in the past, but he's also never been acting in line with his strengths and personality. Astrid points out that it's time for him to be the leader. It is time for him to take action. The traits that made Astrid the perfect Viking don't go away when Hiccup changes her mind. Rather, they persist. They still make her who she is. The only difference now is that she's not alone. She has someone to trust in, someone to follow, someone to help her along the way. And that is what makes Astrid and Hiccup's relationship so powerful. They don't work because they're the same. They work because they're different, and they complement each other perfectly. Oh, and another little side note, I love to look at scenes from other characters' perspectives. For example, take the little scene right before the trial of Flame where Astrid and Hiccup are talking to each other alone in the tunnel. When Gobber sees that, what is he thinking? At the very beginning of the movie, Hiccup says that if he kills a dragon, he might finally get a girlfriend. Gobber immediately clocks that he's talking about Astrid and says, but she's a real Viking, of course implying that Hiccup is not. To Gobber, Hiccup succeeded in his original goal at the beginning of the movie. He became a real Viking, he's about to kill a dragon, and he got the girl. It's wild stuff, but you gotta think how proud he probably is of Hiccup in that moment. And Stoick too. I mean, Hiccup literally tells Astrid not to help him in the arena because Stoick has too much respect for her. So think about this. Stoick leaves Berk on a failed expedition and returns with many casualties and injuries to his people. But when he comes back, he finds that his son is the star of dragon slaying, the top slayer, and he's dating the most popular, skilled, and pretty girl on the island. Astrid is literally on another level, and the deeper you think about it, the better it gets. Way to go, Hiccup. And man, Snotlout really had no chance, did he?
And the clearest proof that every relationship in the story has changed comes from the dialogue itself.
We're going to dive into one specific trick that the screenwriters of How to Train Your Dragon use at least 4 times that is so incredibly satisfying. Arc lines. That's what I call them, at least. An arc line is when a character says a line near the beginning of the movie, and that line is repeated near the end of the movie, but completely different meaning. This is a super awesome way to show just how much a character has grown over the course of their arc. It's not easy to write, but How to Train Your Dragon successfully incorporates not 2, not 3, but 4 arc lines into its story. Each one has its own meaning and revolves around its own character, so let's dive into 4 of them. The first, this is Berk. The first line we're going to talk about is the one that bookends not just a character's arc, but the whole movie. The line I'm talking about is, of course, this is Berk. This is the first line of dialogue you hear spoken in the movie, and for good reason. It's true. Hiccup says this line to tell the audience what they're looking at, which is in fact the Isle of Berk. The character whose arc this line bookends is not any one person in particular, rather, this line is for the entire village as a whole. I mean, think about what follows this line each time. At both the beginning and the end of the movie, Hiccup follows up this line with a description of Berk. Each of these descriptions is different, however. At the beginning, Hiccup is describing the battle-hardened Vikings. He says, the village is old, but the buildings are new. This is, of course, because the dragons are constantly burning down their houses. Hiccup pretty much spends this whole monologue describing the battle between the Vikings and the dragons, and all of its parts. If you've seen the movie, you know that this is definitely not the same at the end. At the end, they aren't fighting dragons. The dragons aren't pests anymore. Instead, they are pets. And you can see just how this affects the village of Berk, and thus Hiccup's closing monologue. There is more complex architecture in the buildings because they know they're less likely to be burned down. The sheep are now grazing in the open because the Vikings know they won't be stolen by the dragons. Their entire way of life has changed, and the village has changed to reflect that. So when Hiccup says, this is Berk at the end of the movie, it has a completely different feel despite being the exact same words. The second line is actually 2. You just gestured to all of me, and shouldn't you be in bed? Hiccup, as the main character, gets 2 arc lines. One is more meaningful than the other. Hiccup himself says the first, you just gestured to all of me, while Snotlout says the second, shouldn't you be in bed? Well, look at Snotlout's first. When Snotlout says, shouldn't you be in bed, to Hiccup at the beginning of the movie, it's demeaning, but it's also true. At this point in the movie, Hiccup's job during dragon attacks is simply to sit there, to hide, and to not get in the way. He can't resist leaving, of course, and this is when Snotlout sees him. He taunts him, saying the line. He doesn't actually care about Hiccup at this point, he's just trying to look cool in front of Astrid. He's just rubbing in the fact that Hiccup is a failure, a disappointment, and he's not even good enough to help protect the village, the most basic part of being a Viking. The opposite is true at the end of this story. When Snotlout repeats this line to Hiccup at the end of the movie, the meaning is flipped on its head. Snotlout and Hiccup have just fought together against the Alpha Dragon. Hiccup is only inside at this moment because his foot is gone. He probably should be in bed considering everything they just went through, but when Snotlout says it now, it doesn't have that demeaning quality. Rather, it's more like friendly ribbing. Hiccup can barely walk, but he's out and about seeing the new version of Burke. This line reflects the evolution of the relationship between Snotlout and Hiccup, what little is there. It goes from bully and victim, cool kid and loser, to both guys having really earned each other's respect. It may not be a friendship at the end of this movie, but they're certainly not enemies of any kind. That's growth, and it's easily seen here with this line. But it's not the best line to use when talking about Hiccup's arc. That goes to, "You just gestured to all of me." This line is said by Hiccup himself both near the beginning and at the end of the movie, but just like the others we've talked about in this video, it has an entirely different meaning at the end. So let's take a look at why. When Hiccup says it the first time, he's responding to Gobber, who has just told him that he needs to change all of this. This reflects the idea that in Gobber, Stoick, and the whole village's mind, everything about who Hiccup is and what he does is wrong. Hiccup spends the whole first half of the movie believing this. It isn't until he makes a personal connection to Toothless and begins to understand the dragons a little more that he realizes there is more than one path to peace in the war between the Vikings and the dragons. It is at that moment that he understands himself. He understands what he needs to do and who he needs to be. More importantly, he understands that he is who he needs to be. He doesn't need to be big and strong, a powerful killer, or exactly like his father. It takes Stoick a lot longer to realize this, but in time, he does. When he sees Hiccup using his strengths of ingenuity and creativity, he realizes that Hiccup is not him. Hiccup has his own strengths and weaknesses, and he can help the village just as much through those as Stoick does with his strength and leadership. It is this understanding that leads us to the second utterance of this line. Stoick says to Hiccup, "I guess we just needed a little more of this." Hiccup replies with, "You just gestured to all of me." It's obvious what this means. Hiccup doesn't need to change everything about him to be useful and worthy of being in the village. Everyone now realizes that, and it is a beautiful moment that really reveals the main themes of the movie. If you want a deeper dive from me into Stoick and Hiccup, check out this video. One more. That's for this, and that's for everything else. The last arc line we're going to talk about is Astrid's. Now, she's not the main character, so her arc isn't nearly as complicated. In fact, it's played off more as a joke. It's actually said 3 times, so we can track Astrid's arc even easier than the other 2. The first time, Astrid is furious at Hiccup. That's for the lies, and that's for everything else. Hiccup gets a takedown on the first phrase and an axe staff to the abdomen on the second. Astrid doesn't care about Hiccup any more than she cares about him just like as a member of the village at this point. But the next time she says it shows that her opinions about Hiccup have slightly started to change. That's for kidnapping me, and that's for everything else. This is said directly following the romantic flight sequence, wherein Hiccup and Toothless do legitimately kidnap Astrid before flying her around and convincing her of Toothless's safety. This time, Astrid punches Hiccup on the shoulder on the first phrase, but she kisses him on the cheek on the second. We can obviously tell that she's starting to come around on him, really not subtle. And the last time takes place in the same scene as all the other arc lines finish. Hiccup has just woken up and he's stumbling around trying to get used to his new foot. Astrid slugs him in the arm, that's for scaring me, then kisses him full on this time, and that's for everything else. It's full go for the 2 of them after that. Hiccup earned not just Astrid's trust, but her affection through his actions and bravery.
That's what makes How to Train Your Dragon endure. Beneath all the dragons, flying sequences, and action scenes is a story about people learning how to understand each other before fear destroys them. Hiccup learns to understand Toothless. Stoick learns to understand Hiccup. Astrid learns to trust someone completely different from herself. Snotlout learns that being respected matters more than pretending to be impressive. And Burke itself transforms because its people finally realize strength isn't the same thing as violence. And that's why the movie feels so emotionally honest. Every major relationship changes because the characters stop trying to force each other into expectations and finally begin seeing each other clearly. And for a movie about Vikings riding dragons, that's surprisingly human.
If you enjoyed the video you just watched, do me a solid and hit that like button. Subscribe for more video essays like this. I've got a lot of Avatar: The Last Airbender stuff coming out because of the remake, and I would hope and love to see you there. All that said, farewell, friends.